So we're here at Kokomo Toys and Collectibles, and can you give me your name and what it is that you do?
In the G.I. Joe community, I'm known as Gyre Viper. I grew up in Wrigleyville in Chicago, 3 blocks from Wrigley Field. I spent 98% of my life. Spent a lot of time in the local Chicago drum and bass scene. Worked at Tower Records for 3 years, which was actually something I really enjoyed. It wasn't for me. It wasn't just a job. It was a way to take my love for music and spend all day talking about it. I love movies. I love complaining about movies.
Don't we all?
Yes, yeah. No, like every chance I get, I love to criticize movies, even movies I like, because I care that much about them, even bad movies.
Right.
Other than that, it's that's sort of the extent of my of what I take seriously.
Okay, so do you still live in Chicago?
Yes.
Okay, so we're in Kokomo, Indiana, which is a little ways away. What drives you to come down to Kokomo?
About 4 or 5 years ago, they held the first Coil Con, which is a G.I. Joe convention run by the Coil Club, and it's just coilcon.com. And I was told, you need to come to this. And at the time, I was new to the G.I. Joe hobby as far as collecting goes. And I was like, okay. Normally, that's not the type of thing I would have done, A, because I was new to collecting as far as being an adult collector. And 2, I just kind of a recluse, didn't like to get out of the house. Never really felt like going anywhere. And my friend Josh said, no, you need to come do this. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was on Todd's lawn where this store used to be located. And so it would be Todd's old store, and then he would have the entire lawn just full of like dealers and G.I. Joe people. And that was the first Coil Con, and it was like a couple dozen people, and that was it. But it was a great time. It was really intimate. It was really, you got to, no one was a stranger. You know, honestly, as long as you engage and don't pull away, you can just make friends in this hobby. Like everyone in this hobby is so welcoming. And that's what Coil Con was, this embodiment of that. It was this, you could just insert yourself in it and you were part of it. And pretty much everyone that was at that first event, for the most part, ended up becoming more involved with the Coil Cons in general, so that year after year they became sort of it was just very fulfilling, and I told myself I would never miss it. And so even though it's a 3.5-hour drive, if I ever get the chance to come out and hang out with Todd or any of these guys in Indiana, it's totally worth my time, because every single one of them is just a super great person, or intelligent. And
yeah, I've had really good experience with people here so far. I love this store. The store is just huge and massive. It's got everything, He-Man, Transformers, all the stuff that I used to grow up with, and like that stuff really resonates with me. And I've noticed you've brought a lot of stuff here today. What exactly is it that you collect? Like, what is this? What are these things?
I pretty much exclusively collect G.I. Joe pre-production prototypes, mock-ups, canceled figures, unreleased figures, artwork. I mean, not in excess. I'm very picky about what I collect.
Right.
Everything I have that I keep in my collection, no matter what I find, I want it to be able to tell a story. Or what I like is when people look at something in my collection and they have to be reminded they're looking at G.I. Joe. Like, I love the weird stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I pretty much just stick to prototypes and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And the history of it. It's more so than this stuff. This stuff is nice to own, and it's fun to own, and it's great. But for me, it's the information. I collect G.I. Joe information more than anything else, which is why when I find 10 things, and I might only keep one, the fact that I could find those 10 things, even if it's like a memo or a piece of paper, is just the greatest thing for me.
That's
like,
cool.
just the stories and the knowledge. So I collect that more than anything, honestly.
Oh, that's good. So what do your family and friends think of your collecting stuff?
Well, my friends, who obviously are not G.I. Joe collectors, they were confused, because for a long time, writing in college or music is what they knew my passions were. They expected me to start a record label or write a book of poetry, something. And they saw me sort of just completely immersed in that. And so when I started doing this, it was really kind of jarring for them. They understood that it was that there was something in my personality that was, harking back to my childhood, and that part they got. But dedicating every ounce of my free time to that really confused them. But they've accepted it. They joked about it for a while, but no, they've accepted it. And as far as my family, it's just everyone has something they do, whether it's physical, mental, and as far as this, I guess no one really cares.
Really?
I don't know anyone would. I mean, I guess it's easy if you're another toy collector, but I don't walk into someone's house. Well, I guess because I do this, I walk into someone's house and I see their tools and I see what they're doing. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Where most people just be like, I don't why it doesn't.
Right.
Not everyone cares about stuff, so I try not to overthink that aspect. To assume that my family should think anything of it at all.
Okay.
I don't know.
So would you consider like a niche field, a niche market?
Yeah, it's as far as prototype collecting, it's pretty niche. I mean, there's people who dabble in it like loosely, who just here and there, and then there's people that are, I mean, they just they're like machines, like animals. They just consume it. But a lot of it's very isolated. A lot of it's very private. A lot of it's very quote unquote privileged. Like you're lucky if you get to see stuff at all. So yeah, it should be a good word for it.
Okay.
I'd say it's more like a shadow niche. It's like even more off to the side.
So what do you do when you're not focused on collecting?
I've spent the last 2 years trying to decide what I consider the 10 best films of all time, which has taken far longer than I thought, but it's actually kind of important to me. I love film, and I love arguing about, like I said, I love arguing about film. So or at least just criticizing it. And so that actually is a lot of fun to me, but it's kind of draining after a while, because then you start overthinking it and you're wondering if you actually really enjoy something, or if you're trying to. That takes up a lot of my time. Other than that, it's just been G.I. Joe and G.I. Joe history, just because I'm always touring my collection or helping someone else tour their collection, or doing podcasts or articles, or it's sort of become not my life, but it's become a large part of it. So everything else has kind of gone,
What would you say is the most significant piece in your collection?
So basically in 1980, and even a little bit before that, Hasbro designers really wanted to, a few of them really wanted to bring G.I. Joe back, because it had ended after, Super Joe, the 12-inch line, all that stuff. And Hasbro just wasn't interested. It just wasn't something that they thought was viable. I mean, you're coming off of Vietnam, you're going into the 80s, which is a whole nother thing in its own, and Hasbro just had no interest in G.I. Joe, even though that was sort of the brand that, along with things like Mr. Potato Head and pencil boxes, had gotten Hasbro where it was. But it had kind of fallen off. It was a new generation. It was just, but these people really wanted G.I. Joe to be resurrected. And at the same time, they were trying to get other sort of military lines, kind of out there. There was this line called Rough Trucks, which were these shift control things where, you'd shift forward and the tank would go forward, or the truck, whatever. And there's a few pieces of art that are out there. I own one of them, and they're dated 1980. They don't say G.I. Joe anywhere on them, but they're part of this Rough Trucks thing. And the first one is obviously what turned into the G.I. Joe Vamp, which is the Jeep. The next one is the Air Jeep, which was this weird MASH-looking helicopter thing, which obviously became the Skyhawk. There was a shift control tank, which became the Mobat. There was a missile launcher that didn't really turn into anything. But anyways, even though this art doesn't say G.I. Joe on it, and it's dated 1980, which is before G.I. Joe sort of existed again in the 4-inch scale, these are the precursors to G.I. Joe, because one of the Rough Trucks that there was actually a prototype for, Ron Rudett, who was one of the most well-known G.I. Joe designers, painted it up and threw a G.I. Joe logo on it in a meeting with a bunch of other stuff without saying a word about it, really. And that logo on that truck it's called the seed of G.I. Joe. It's what everyone sort of agrees hit management subconscious and kind of brought it, just sort of gave it that much light that it didn't have before. So anyways, so they had this Rough Trucks idea, and And Ron did that with the logo, whatever. And at some point, they finally got management. Hassenfeld, actually, the guy who was in charge then of Hasbro, said, okay, fine. You have 1 month to convince me that G.I. Joe is even remotely viable. And so everyone scrambled. R&D, the designers, the marketers, they all did their own. They all came up with their own sort of pitch to bring to this, this seminal meeting. And so one of the sculptors, his name was Jim Totley. He's this famous African-American sculptor. He actually has sculptures, I think in Boston at the Orange Line, and he has sculptures outside other, like commercial establishments. But he was not only like a commercial sculptor, he was also, he loved toys. He was also, like toy designing was like one of his passions. It wasn't just a job for him. Some people, they get a job and, they're making toys because they're good at, they have an engineering background and that's just the job they got. For them, it's just a job. For him, it was both. It was art fused with science and technology and sculpting and, toy making. So anyways, Jim Totley, as the meetings, I think it was like 2 weeks out or so, ran out to the store and bought a competitor figure. And it was a Buck Rogers Tiger Man figure, which is what is under here.
Okay.
And he brought this back to his desk, and he sculpted onto it, and he painted it, and he gave it military details, gun. There's a canteen on the back. He's got pockets. He's got, these straps here. Give it a helmet. And if you actually, it's weird over time, but if you look, there's actually camouflage paint. So it's actually a camo deco. It's not just as plain green as it looks.
Okay.
It would probably look closer to Stalker here.
Okay.
So he brought this Tiger Man figure back to his desk, threw some clay on it as fast as he could, painted it up, and he brought this into the meeting, and it was basically to show Hasbro management that G.I. Joe, because at the time they thought, hey, we could do G.I. Joe at this 3 3/4 scale like Star Wars, like Mego, and people management like, no one cares. No one's going to want, we don't want that. No, it's not going to happen. We can't do it articulated. If Rough Trucks had gone through, and even if it had become G.I. Joe, figures were supposed to be the accessories. And some of the stories we've heard is that they would have just been torsos glued into the vehicles.
Oh, wow.
And not full figures. And at the very least, they weren't going to be articulated and have detail.
Huh.
Like that was never even on the table until Jim Totley brought this into a meeting and said, no, look, we can do the articulation of Mego, we can do the detail of Star Wars, we can do, we can do faces, we can do, clothing, we could do weapons. And I actually have the certificate from Greg Bernston, who was a G.I. Joe designer there at the time. The end of this says, it was also instrumental for the development of the figure's articulation and movement for the proposed new line. Sort of premise of this was Hasbro, and Hasbro, other companies do this all the time, but Hasbro would do it a lot. They would always rely on a competitor figure to push the envelope. So even though it wasn't always Hasbro's idea, they were really good at going out and getting something and at least coming up with an idea using a competitor's toy. So it kind of goes like this. So a Buck Rogers figure is responsible for, not the figure itself, obviously just the idea behind it, but so Buck Rogers Tiger Man, without Buck Rogers Tiger Man, if you really wanted to overgeneralize and just make it pretty, without Buck Rogers Tiger Man, G.I. Joe would not conceivably be this articulated, detailed line.
Wow.
Which could mean in a parallel universe like Sliders or something that G.I. Joe does not become successful in 1982, and therefore Hasbro cannot get the rights to Transformers.
Wow.
And therefore and another aspect of G.I. Joe's history is that in order to promote the toys, because of the FCC laws at the time, you were like He-Man did it. There's a very limited window you could have between cartoons, comics, commercials, and toys, and how that all ties together to promote it. Hasbro found a loophole with their comic book where they could do commercials for the comics, which were commercials for the toys, essentially.
Right.
And that loophole actually influenced not just toy companies, but all companies, to an extent, were able to then find their own loopholes to promote stuff that the FCC was like, you can't do it this way. Like, G.I. Joe changed that landscape. And it wasn't the first time. The 12-inch G.I. Joe was the first marketed action figure. And that showed other companies, oh, we can do this? We were just hoping people might buy it. So that's the second time in history G.I. Joe has changed not just toys, but the way the world kind of, and obviously I'm really broadly overgeneralizing. But if you want to get poetic about it, so without Buck Rogers Tiger Man, G.I. Joe, conceivably, again, an alternate universe, doesn't get successful. Transformers doesn't get purchased the way it was through Hasbro, which doesn't make it the huge success it is. I mean, you can see the domino effect. Now, obviously, you can do that with almost anything in the world. But we're sitting here and we're talking about this, so that's... As far as being my most significant piece, I mean, it's sort of... without the 1980 artwork, this wouldn't have gotten that far, and you can obviously trace it back. But as far as action figures go, and the way that we understand action figures today, it kind of starts with this. Even though Star Wars predates it, even though Mego obviously predates it, that's what it took. It took someone saying, you know what, I'm just going to take the competitor product, I'm going to make it look like I think G.I. Joes can look. And I mean, if you look at this, if you look at the straps on, these aren't prototypes, obviously, I got these from Todd's store, these are just 1980s, but, if you look at the straps, if you look at like the detail on, with the grenade, I mean, it's very similar. Like the translation was, was pretty on point. Obviously, there's some detail that didn't make it for cost. There's not a lot of pockets on the legs, but the idea is there. The aesthetics are there. And these were the heads on these actually were sculpted by Jim Totley, who did that. He did most of the 82 heads. Okay. So the translation was, he was in control of the head sculpts and sort of the look of G.I. Joe to an extent from this moment on, until he passed away in 1986. Oh. So, to answer your question, this would be my most significant piece, because I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here. And as I kind of joked to Todd earlier, that his store might not be here because of all the action figure lines that they don't exist because of G.I. Joe, but G.I. Joe was the competition. Right. And so, and like Transformers, Hasbro was able to purchase Transformers because of, or at least, get that connection with Takara because of the success of G.I. Joe. Like 1982, 1983, they were like, hey, we're rolling in it. Like, I mean, the 80s for Hasbro was so profitable that they were just throwing money around. Wow. Sculptors would get paid between like $1,000 and $8,000 a sculpt. Wow. They're painters. I mean, they would hire these professional painters and sculptors who were, well known in their own fields. They didn't have to go make toys, but Hasbro said, we want the best of the best. Where Toy Biz would hire these amazing people and tell them, tone it down, we don't want the best of the best. Hasbro, they just kept, it was just, for them, it was just, we have all this money, we're not going to spare any expense.
But I mean, this sounds like you actually have like the one that started it all. Yeah. The one G.I. Joe. But how did you get a hold of it?
So Greg Bernstein, who was a Hasbro designer and one of the original, it's funny because there's 13 original G.I. Joes, and just indirectly they kind of referred to themselves, a few of them, as the original 13. It was 13 designers who all just kind of they were in it together in the beginning. So Greg Bernstein was one of the original 13. He had preserved a whole lot of prototypes and like some vehicles and some figures and some 2-ups like this, and he had put a bunch of stuff on eBay. And the thing is, before I got into this hobby, it was like 2006 or 7. I think it was like at a Kansas convention, or maybe it wasn't Kansas. I wasn't around, so I didn't pay much attention, but which is irresponsible of me. But he had brought everything that he owned still to this convention to show everybody on a table. And this is one of the things he had. So when I heard that he had this, I reached out to him and I was like, first of all, like, I've seen all your stuff on eBay, like, it's great stuff, but it's not stuff I'm really interested in. This is something I would be really interested in. I was like, well, I haven't really dug it out yet, and if I sell it, it'd probably be the last thing I'd ever sell because of what it is. And we talked, and I interviewed him. I got all these, we had this back and forth. Instead of just saying, I swear, a lot of people, they approach these designers and go, I love G.I. Joe, and I think it's great, and it means so much to me. And they try to get something, and then they just turn around and flip it to someone like me. Oh, wow. Yeah, but that's the nature of things. So that's just how it is. True. It's what it is. Yeah. So, but I just said, I had all these references. I was like, look, just ask this person, and if you feel comfortable still talking to me, I never presume that I'm entitled to that information. Right. I try to let people know that I'm doing this because I love it and whatever. And he sold everything that I could, that most people could remember he brought to that convention, and that was it. And I sent him a message, and I was like, did you ever find that Megos figure? And he's like, actually, yeah. And he's like, do you want it? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, I'll sell it to you. Now he could have put this on eBay, and everyone could have fought for it.
I'm sure there would have been
knowing
a fight
what
too.
It is. Now, because it's not technically a G.I. Joe, and because it has no G.I. Joe parts, there are pre-production collectors who think it's only worth a certain amount. Okay. The other half are people who think that it's wholly significant and is responsible for anyone collecting any J.J. prototypes to an extent. So therefore, it's worth a lot.
Okay.
But honestly, it's only worth what someone's willing to pay, or what someone's willing to want. So it's like, but anyways, part of that was like, he could have put that on eBay and had both sides kind of fight. The people that would have only bid it up to what they think it's worth because it has no G.I. Joe parts and it's not. I mean, technically, it's not a G.I. Joe prototype. It's the G.I. Joe prototype, but it's not a G.I. Joe prototype. And then the people who would have bid, he could have done that, and he didn't. He, for whatever reason, he decided that I, that I was, it was okay that I had it, even though I didn't really know him. I'd only talked to him a few times via email. I was a newer collector. I didn't bid on any of it. Most people I didn't bid on any of his stuff on eBay because I was holding out for that. And most people be like, oh, well, you didn't spend any money. I'm not gonna, So for whatever reason, Greg. So go ahead, and he was nice enough to include a certificate that explains what it is and give me more information about it, and that's how I ended up with it. And I love it. It's one of those things where I always try to bring it wherever I go. Like whenever I set up my collection, or a few of us set up our collection, I always bring it, even though a lot of people might have seen it or know what it is. I feel like it sort of has to be there because of what it is. Like, even if people had seen it 100 times, I'd probably still have to bring it just because of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's weighty. For what it is, there's a lot of weight to it. Did you want me to move on to other stuff?
Well,
I can talk about this forever.
You were talking, you said this is a 2-up. Can you explain what this is?
So, and it's not done so much now. And sometimes now, when it's done kind of as an homage to the way things used to be done. So, in the 80s, some companies, depending on how they did things, would sculpt things at 2 to 1 scale or 2 up. So this is a 2 up original sculpt, hand sculpted. This isn't a copy or anything.
Wow.
Of Cobra Ferret. Okay, so a sculptor would sculpt these at 2 to 1. They would get sculpt sheets that of a foreview of the figure with like this, the back, the sides.
I've seen that before.
And so from that, and then from reference material like this, a sculptor would sit down and begin to sculpt. This was sculpted by Bill Merkline, who's a friend of mine. And he sculpted for Toy Biz, Knickerbocker. He sculpted the Krull figures for the Krull movie that never came out.
Okay.
He sculpted a lot of X-Men figures. He sculpted the Alien 3 kit. There's like a model kit, whatever.
Okay.
He sculpted the dove that's on your Visa card, and he still has it. He sculpted it 1 to 1.
Wow.
He was the only person that could sculpt holograms to that extent. So Visa and American Banknote. He sculpted the hologram that's on the first holographic issue of National Geographic.
Okay.
Anyway, so he's this massively talented sculptor. So the original sculpts for some of these actually were hand painted, the clay. We've seen the older 2-ups where they took the original sculpt and painted over it. And the problem with that is that at the time, because it was new, the paint's peeling off because the clay, these shrink, depending on what they're made out of. Waxes shrink, clay shrinks, or they would break them up to reuse what's underneath.
Okay.
Underneath is what's known as a standard buck, which you can kind of see. I can't really show the people on the camera. I should have actually brought a buck because I'm a moron. But a standard buck is a 2-up armature, usually Dynacast, urethane, something, and that's what they would sculpt upon.
Okay.
And so they would sculpt onto this buck, and then make a copy, and then one copy be painted, which would be for color reference, like this.
Okay.
So that China or even Hasbro knew what the colors would be. Okay. And then another copy would be used for tooling. So what they would do is they would send it over to China or even in-house at Hasbro, and they would pantograph it. So the machine would do this, and then it would copy a smaller one like that to make the actual size. And that's what they would use to make the molds, to make the test shots, to then make the figures. So, but they would do this for a few reasons. They would sculpt 2-ups. One, because it was sort of the way things were done, even though Star Wars was sort of 1 to 1, but they weren't articulated.
Okay.
They didn't have action features.
That's true.
And,
That's true.
So, and their detail was a little different than this. Again, it's Hasbro taking what one company was doing and doing it differently and better to an extent. They would do this not only just for detail, because if you look at this, obviously these details have to get shrunken down but still be recognizable, whether it's facial features, whether it's these straps, whatever. Another was quality control. These things had to be perfect. Like, these things had to be engineered so perfectly that, you know, you didn't choke on him as a kid.
Right.
Like that was sort of the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill would get paid just stupid money for that. He did about 70 G.I. Joes, and I think he got paid between like $1,500 and $8,000, depending on what it was and depending on the work. And he was always paid for his time as a freelancer.
Wow.
Just like I said, Hasbro was just throwing money around. So, anyways, these are 2-ups. Toy Biz did 2-ups. Bill actually sculpted some of those. And Toy Biz 2-ups, obviously, if a Toy Biz figure is this big, the 2-up's about this big.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a few of them. They're massive. They're like giant, crazy statues of your favorite toys.
Wow. That's cool.
And so this is called a pattern or an original sculpt, because I mean this is Bill would sculpt in epoxy. There was like a 2-part epoxy plumber seal combination. He would switch it up, and it was so sturdy and so perfect that Hasbro didn't really need to do much with these. It would just, that's why most of his exist. Where theirs were done in clay or wax, and they would break them down or destroy them and reuse the buck. So a lot of the original sculpts are gone unless they were done by someone like Bill who sculpted in something that wasn't so fragile.
Okay.
So this is a 2-up paint master, and this is what they would use for presentation. They would send one of these, which was more like some of these are articulated. This one's not, because it's just for presentation and for color.
Okay.
The articulated ones they would send over to China, either painted or unpainted for reference, or so they could do the tooling and the pantographing. So this is Desert Scorpion. Here's a production one. You can see that they're, you know,
2-to-1.
yeah.
They are.
And now some independent companies like Four Horsemen, who do stuff for like Mattel and
Yep.
Power Lords, they'll do 2-ups, but I don't know how much of that is cosmetic. I know that sometimes you can get their 2-ups in their Kickstarter as like a thing, but I don't know if they use those for tooling. I've never really investigated that. But I love that people still work in that form, because there are people who, I mean, for a long time, Bill Merkline was telling Hasbro, you know, you can do these at scale. I can sculpt these 1-to-1 for you and it'll be cheaper. And Hasbro's like, we found out that some stuff was sculpted 1-to-1, but we can't pin down what. We've heard stories of it, and I have a feeling that if we know what was sculpted 1-to-1, there's probably a difference in the quality or what breaks, or maybe it turned out really well and they just still thought it was. I mean, if you're a company, switching things up really fast on people you might all of a sudden have sculptors who can only really do this, and then you have low quality figures. Like I don't know, I wasn't there. In 1983 though, they came up with a sculpting Bible, and in pre-production terms, a Bible is any kind of guide that, like there's like style guides, there's what a character can be like, what a character can do, what his personality has to be every time he's portrayed. But they also had it for stuff like sculpting and art. So in the sculpting guide, which was done in 1983, they sort of lay out how they want things to be from now on, and it describes every piece on this standard buck that's underneath there and how it should be done. So it wasn't, I mean, like, this thing reads like stereo instructions. It's just so much for something that is so disposable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That is true.
I mean, we're not even supposed to be sitting here talking about this. I mean, this was not designed for us to be sitting and having a conversation about 30 years later. This is only necessary so that you don't choke on it. Like, that's all this is.
Wow.
So it's just, you know.
I mean, a lot of care and detail has gone into this stuff, and it is pretty amazing to the extent someone will go to make sure it looks good, looks perfect, looks right.
On that same note, there's stuff like this.
What is that? That doesn't even look like G.I. Joe.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like I said earlier, I like the stuff where people look at my collection and they have to be reminded they're not looking at Thundercats or He-Man. This is Star Brigade War Dog, and this is the 2-up for it, so he would have actually ended up being about this big. I actually have a 1-to-1, but my friend's borrowing it. And again, to your point of so much detail for something that isn't going to get made. So I mean, even the inside, like even the roof of his mouth, like they didn't really have to go to this. I don't know if I can get it in there, but there's the ridges of the roof of his mouth, like all this detail that's in here, just needless, because when it's shrunken down, a lot of the stuff's going to get lost. But that's why it was done at 2-up, and that's why it was done so strongly. This was done by a friend of mine named Dave Billiot, who was also a sculptor for Hasbro. And so the idea behind War Dog, this is unassembled, is that you would pull his tail in and out, his mouth would open, his mandibles would go
he has mandibles too.
like this, and his tongue would come in and out at the same time. And then he was going to have these horns on top. I also have concept art, which I should have brought for him. And then he was going to have a gun mounted on his back, a glow-in-the-dark gun that was sort of like mounted on his back. Now, the original model for this, which you can see on yojo.com, is it's Hot Wheels and Jurassic Park. Sort of, it's like a Jurassic Park, I think, Dimetrodon with Hot Wheels parts, like for like his gear or whatever.
Wow. Is
like the mock-up for it. So again, back to Hasbro taking just weird competitor stuff and saying, hey, we want it to kind of look like this. And this is one of, as much as that is my most significant piece, this is my favorite piece because he's just, I love the weird stuff, and he's this absurd.
Yeah.
I
if I saw that, I definitely wouldn't think G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, exactly. He was actually going to be someone's pet, and we're not really sure whose. I mean, that's how.
Standard issue for G.I. Joe.
Yeah. Well, this would have been 1995, and the thing is, in 1995, you have so much canceled G.I. Joe product that we still haven't seen it all. There's a line called X-Soldiers, which was going to be Hasbro's answer to X-Men before they came up with Extreme.
Wow.
So it's a lot of things that kind of look like when Image or other lines would do their version of Captain America, just like that.
Super
picture. It's just like that. Yeah, it's that same idea where the characters look, they're supposed to remind you of something that they're not.
Okay.
But these were going to be G.I. Joe and Cobra. Like there's this guy named Egghead who's just this floating. He's very MODOK-y, but he's this giant egg floating in a chair with little arms, and he was going to be a G.I. Joe. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's they were competing with things like X-Men, competing with things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers. People complain about the direction that G.I. Joe was going, whether it's the weird stuff, the aliens, the eco warriors.
It's hard to imagine.
But if that's your job and you have to feed your kids or you have to pay bills, you have to be the guy who finds an answer.
Yeah.
Even if the answer is sitting in front of you the whole time. Like, even if this is where G.I. Joe's supposed to be, like the non-crazy military, one step in the future thing, fine. A lot of people misunderstand G.I. Joe because even though the people who were behind G.I. Joe were a lot of them were military sculptors and artists and whatever, G.I. Joe was never supposed to be this military line. It was supposed to be more like Mission Impossible with military aesthetics, but always one step in the future.
Okay, I see.
And the thing is that because of the cost and because of things like Stalker, which are very straight. Stalker has always looked like this from his first appearance in Ron Rudet's pitch book. He was always pretty much just like this. Where someone like Grand Slam or there's in Ron Rudet's pitch book, they have these giant laser backpacks and laser helmets, and they look more futuristic than Star Wars. So whenever G.I. Joe, people were like, "Oh, I hated when G.I. Joe got crazy." I'm like, no. In 1981, G.I. Joe was already crazy. It just also had this.
Yeah.
Originally, Snake Eyes was a character named Mr. Bombs, and he was this guy with a dude like a half mask type thing, kind of like Iron Fist, and like a big like porn mustache.
Wow.
And just bombs all over him, and his name was Mr. Bombs.
Wow.
But then he got fused with a character that Larry Hama had created called Spook, and they put the two together, and then you have Snake Eyes. But then Snake Eyes, who was the very first G.I. Joe that they kind of ran off on the line, who's all black, originally he was going to look more like this. He was going to have like, we think he was going to have like more like camo pants with like a greenish blackish top closer to this.
Okay.
And he was just going to be this masked thing that was going to look more like the first 13 figures did. But for cost, they just said, you know what, he looks nice in black. I mean, he's the first example of Hasbro cheaping out. Okay. And he's the most iconic G.I. Joe.
He is.
He's embraced. Yeah. So everything that people hate that Hasbro does, like cheaping out on paint apps, whatever. He's basically a walking test shot. Yeah. And he's got over how many versions of Snake Eyes are there? Andrew, 43, 53.
It's gotta be at least 43.
He's this 30-year celebration of cost cutting. But he's the most iconic. He's one of the most iconic ninjas in pop culture.
Oh man.
So I mean that's that's kind of like what I said earlier about the information. Like I love that I absorb.
But why G.I. Joe of all things? It could be anything.
Okay, when I was little, I loved He-Man, Thundercats.
Me too. Oh yeah.
The difference was that when I got a Thundercat figure, I couldn't play with it like a Thundercat. When I got a He-Man figure, I could almost play with it like a He-Man figure. When I got a G.I. Joe figure, not only could I play with it, the articulation and the detail was there, but the G.I. Joe cartoons, they dictated playability to me, where I didn't get that from other cartoons. Some of like Thundercats kind of told you how to play with your Thundercats. But G.I. Joe, for some reason, just translated that so much better to me as a kid. And I remember thinking that to myself, because I remember I'd sit there looking at my G.I. Joes and go, I'd rather play with these. Yeah. Like, I would just rather... It was the articulation, the scale, everything was just what I wanted out of a toy. Thundercats were big and stupid.
They were really big.
I loved them.
Yeah.
I loved Mask. But you know what? In order to play with Mask, after a while, cars turning into vehicles.